I am here in the desert traveling with my Kindle so that I have books no matter where I go. And for Jane Austen July, I'm going to read some books that are written by modern authors but are set in the Regency time period. And then in this vlog, I will be sharing my thoughts on them and kind of some summaries of them so that you can decide if any of these books are choices that you want to read for Jane Austen July. Reading The Lady's Guide to Utter Ruin by Alison Goodman was such a delight. This is the second book in the Ill-Mannered Ladies series. The Lady's Guide is actually set so closely to the end of the first book that it really could be read together as one book that has just been printed separately. And we're still following the Colebrook twins, that's Lady Augusta, who's Gus, and Julia. And they are in their early 40s, which I love so much. I love having those middle-aged heroines who are still really tough and formidable and opinionated and kind of bucking the societal system. So without giving away too much of what happens in the first book, we're still continuing on with Lord Evan's family as well as Mr. Kent. And that, again, I love the continuity between the first book and the second book. I will say, Alison Goodman does not shy away from hard-hitting topics. One of the main themes that she addresses is same-gender relationships and how they were perceived and forbidden. Additionally, she is very much exposing the challenges that women were facing during that Regency era, namely asylums. So women who were not behaving as people thought that they should be often were put in asylums and being held in abhorrent conditions. And that topic and Alison Goodman's focusing on really kind of, again, heavy and challenging topics continues within this second book as well. And we see that in the Brethren of Rack and Ruin, which is this secretive gentleman's club that Gus tries to infiltrate. Within the interaction of the club members and as Gus and Julia are trying to help people who need help, there are your typical like duels and kidnappings and scenes where somebody needs to use self-defense. But also, again, please be aware, there are trigger warnings with violence against women, and it can be difficult to read. So one of the things that I wasn't sure about as I was reading this is, in the first book, Gus and Julia really have this very close relationship. And in the second book, Julia and her started butting heads, and at first I really didn't enjoy that. However, seeing how the book progresses and seeing the character growth that they both experienced, sort of the choices that Julia's, I think, heading towards making, as well as Gus, I do think that they needed to kind of separate themselves as twins, and that was accomplished in this book. I had the pleasure of reading The Lady's Guide in South Central Utah in desert terrain that is in a very remote area. Something that this area is actually known for are these bentonite clay hills that just are incredibly barren and reminiscent of the moon. So while unrelated to the plot, it still was a stunning location in which to read this book. I am absolutely wanting to continue this series. While the ending of this resolves any loose ends from both the first and second books, the setup for the third book promises at an exciting prospect to look forward to. I decided to start reading Miss Percy's Pocket Guide to the Care and Feeding of British Dragons by Quenby Olsen while inside a cave called the Goblin's Lair in the arid region of South Central Utah. Miss Mildred Percy, a mid-40s spinster living in her sister's home, inherits a mysterious trunk from her eccentric great-uncle. She finds artifacts and books and mysterious documents, but most exciting of all, she finds a stone that soon hatches into, you guessed it, a baby dragon. The topography and rock formations on the hike to climb to this cave entrance are reminiscent of the dragon egg that Miss Percy inherited. Present for the birth of the baby dragon are the vicar, Mr. Wiggin, and his housekeeper, who is Mrs. Babington. Frankly, Mrs. Babington is the most vibrant of characters with her humor and passion. And both Mr. Wiggin and Mrs. Babington become bonded with Miss Percy over the dragon. The novel opens up with Mildred obviously being bullied and manipulated by her sister who she lives with. So for the first time in her life, when she receives this unusual inheritance, she hides it from her. I was rooting soundly for Mildred to stand up to her sister and get a backbone. The author did a great job of moving Mildred gently from a lifetime of patterns into breaking those to stand on her own by having Mildred fall in love with baby dragon Fitz. Her motherly nature simply just takes over. The villain in this book, aside from Mildred's sister, is quite clear from the start. The author uses satire and sarcasm to introduce readers to the viewpoint of Reginald Hawthorne, who believes the dragon, or stone, should be his inheritance, not Mildred's. Miss Percy's Guide is a wonderful balance of coziness and humor and high stakes, with the birth of a dragon being the only fantastical element, and it stars a relatable middle-aged heroine who finds her inner strength and bravery simply through the love that she develops for Fitz. The novel ends cleanly, so it could be read as a standalone, but the author has set up the premise for the next adventure with Mildred, Fitz, and Mr. Wiggins heading to Wales. There are 3 books released so far in the Miss Percy's Guide series by Quenby Olsen, and there is quite a cult-like following of this series, so I'm hopeful that Miss Percy's adventures may continue past that 3rd book, although I don't think anything has been announced yet. I began reading A Terrible Nasty Business by Julia Seals while in eastern Utah outside of Moab, which was a stunning location for reading outside. A Terrible Nasty Business is the second novel of the Beatrice Steele's series. I thoroughly enjoyed the first installment of A Murder Most Agreeable, and just as with that book, I was drawn to the lusciously colorful and creative cover, complete with flying squirrels. Seriously. In this second book, Beatrice Steele has moved from her small hometown of Swampshire to London with her quirky and vibrant but useless chaperone, Miss Helen Bolton. Beatrice is finally realizing her dream of becoming a detective, and as she and Inspector Drake, who is her partner from solving the mystery in the first book, open a fledgling private detective agency. Starting out, their cases are minor and not really important, as would be expected when you're opening a business, but as luck would have it, their first significant case arises on their doorstep and they hit the ground running to solve the murder case. It is within this murder mystery that we see Beatrice really change from being a woman with a scandalous curiosity, as is in the first book about detecting, into developing more complex sleuthing skills. This second book in the series continues with the modern sense of humor and witty sarcasm, just as in the first book with the on-the-nose naming structure of like Swampshire and Croaksworth for the guy who dies. We in this book have the Neighborhood Association of Gentlemen Sweetbriarians, which is short for NAGs. Readers also see the continuity of the theme of Beatrice needing to balance societal expectations, her family's needs and expectations, with her desire to be a professional detective. However, A Terrible Nasty Business moves from humor that was kind of like exaggerated stereotypes and some slapstick comedy into darker humor, and this book had a lot of political machinations. I loved the wit of the first book, but this dichotomy in the second installment is glaringly apparent as Beatrice tries to navigate what's supposed to be like serious government corruption, undercurrents with flying squirrels, for instance. A Terrible Nasty Business also moves from a manor house whodunit in one night to a citywide, broad ramifications mystery that takes quite a bit of time to solve. And I realized that the author needed to change the setting and timing, but I'm realizing that part of the charm of the first book was the creativity of the locked manor murder being solved in just one night. I was still in eastern Utah when I read What Comes of Attending the Commoners' Ball by Elisabeth Aimee Brown. In this Cinderella-adjacent retelling, we have Hester Flanders, who is newly arrived in the capital city from her life in a farming family. She's motivated to earn a steady income to send home in order to bring her ailing father to the city to receive medical care. Her determination to attend the royal family's Commoners' Ball, which is held once a year, is driven by hunger. She's literally starving as she works as a seamstress for low wages. Hester strikes me as someone who is neurodivergent. She is hyper fixated on not accepting gifts from anyone throughout the entire book. She's like obsessed about it for fear of owing a debt to the Fae folk. And this is perceived as like a country superstition by those around her, but Hester is determined and will not be swayed from this. At the Commoner's Ball, Hester catches the attention of Prince Hugh, who is like a flamboyant younger brother of Prince Lucas. And here, of course, we have the makings of a love triangle, which is normally my least favorite trope, especially among brothers, but Hester is as obviously not interested in Hugh as she is interested in Lucas. And so it doesn't really feel like a love triangle. And the romance is quite slow burn and can be considered clean. Hester is increasingly in need of help as Hugh systematically destroys her life, to be honest. I do think that this is meant to be a little bit of tongue-in-cheek and humorous, but it feels very much like gaslighting and an abusive use of power, and so not really my favorite plot device. Hester prods on through, continuing to strive for independence and trying to avoid any semblance of debt. Sometimes I wonder if authors are annoyed with the comp's title game, but if you liked Half a Soul by Olivia Atwater, then I think this would be a decent option for you. Continuing my stay in Eastern Utah, I started The Work of Art by Mimi Matthews. This is not my first Mimi Matthews. I've enjoyed what I've read of hers. And so when I saw this for free one time on Kindle, I went ahead and grabbed it. So we've got Felida Saderwaite, who is an orphan, recently being given over to the care of her uncle. Her parents had passed away a long time ago, but she was raised by her grandfather in just what seems like a very idyllic childhood. She's very connected with dogs especially, but just has a kindness in her heart for animals. And she is newly arrived in London for basically the Marriage Mart season. And her beauty is punctuated by heterochromia, which is an unusual condition of having two different colored eyes. So we soon learn, along with Philly, that she has generated the interest of the infamous Duke of Moreland, who is known in seedier crowds as the Collector, due to his obsession with acquiring rare novelties. His first wife died under suspicious circumstances, and he is now in the market for a wife. We note his cruelty almost from the moment that Philly meets him, and it's then terrifying to discover that Philly's greedy uncle has approved the match. So he's saying, yes, Duke of Moreland with a wife who passed away suspiciously, you can court my niece. And Philly is really at the behest of her uncle and his family and doesn't really have a say in it. So alone in the world, Philly feels that she has no choice but to ask her new friend, Captain Arthur Heywood, to help her. Now, Captain Heywood is a veteran with lasting injuries. He has a limp, and he also has PTSD from his time in the war. And so he offers her to marry her. And so this results in a marriage of convenience. As Felida and Captain Hayward move to his country estate, which I love as a setting, I moved into Colorado. As far as the marriage of convenience, I really think it's sweet because it comes after the development of a friendship, but just beware, it is quite fast moving. But he sees kind of how she's able to manipulate a situation so that she can tell that he's in pain walking, but he can't really acknowledge that without losing face. And so she'll say oh, I need to go back to the house. Can you please walk with me? And she'll rest her arm on him to try to help. So he just sees her kindness to animals and other people. Murder at Mistlewaithe Manor by A.J. Skelly is a perfect choice for Christmas in July and Jane Austen July, and making the choice to read this by a cold mountain lake felt immersive and like the perfect spot to dive into this locked manor murder mystery set during a raging Christmas winter storm. In this, we've got a poem that seems to predict or dictate murder choices, a la And Then There Were None. We've got a game afoot reminiscent of the 1980s Clue movie, complete with a monetary prize that is enticing to all of the specifically chosen guests. I have learned that as a reader, I prefer locked room or locked manor settings, so the idea of a high-stakes game with a mysterious host while a storm is outside pummeling this locked manor and all of these unusual characters are staying there for the weekend is incredibly enticing to me. Add in the Clue movie and the Christie connection and I was all in. So we've got our main character, Emma Grace Hastings, who is now stuck in this manor with her ex-fiance and hopeful current match. And this obviously sets the novel up to have a love triangle and the possibility of some romance. And while I enjoyed kind of the red herring manipulations and motivations of all the people in attendance, I wasn't overly fond of the romantic elements. And unfortunately, I was able to guess pretty quickly who the perpetrator was, and I had trouble feeling connected to any of the characters or their stories. So while this was set up as something I really should have enjoyed, I would recommend The Most Wonderful Crime of the Year by Ali Carter, as I prefer that for a novel that blends Christmas at a locked manor, in a storm, with a high-stakes game with a mysterious host, and a hint of romance.
Thanks so much for watching. Until next time.